has a lot to share. Most importantly, out of all the drama and all that he's gone through in his life came Shiloh Israel Children's Fund to help these children deal with terrorism. There is no child living in Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, that has not been affected by terrorism. Their parents killed, siblings killed, family killed. So David's mission is to help these children. And that's all I'll say, and hand it over to you.
Thank you. By a show of hands, given that introduction, how many of you have heard of the West Bank? And by a show of hands, how many of you have read about it in your Bibles? No, you haven't. Put those hands down. The word, the West Bank, is a term that was created by the Muslim nations in the past few decades. How many of you have heard of Palestine? How many of you have seen it in your Bibles? Okay, you won't be fooled again, huh? Well, the truth is, someone came to me after one of my speaking appearances and told me that there actually is a revisionist Bible that has been put out by an organization. It's a Muslim organization that tries to get into the churches to influence people in America with their revisionist narrative, where they change the semantics. So the word Palestine actually comes from the Romans. 2,000 years ago, the Romans exiled all of the Jews from the land of Israel. And this is after a couple of thousand years of the Israeli kingdoms in Israel. King David, King Solomon, so on and so forth. And they changed the name of the land of Israel to Palestina. Palestina, giving it a Roman derivative of the word Philistines. So we had one enemy of Israel, the Romans, renaming the land of Israel after the Philistines. Kind of akin to, say, if, God forbid, Al-Qaeda would get control of the United States and rename it ISIS. It's a similar concept. Well, that's what's happened to Israel over the years. We have all these different enemies of Israel trying to take control of the land of Israel and changing it semantically, not just militarily, but also semantically, changing the entire narrative from truth to fiction. So, here in the United States, we also know a little bit about changing narratives from truth to fiction. So recently I've been seeing a lot of things on the news about the wall. And we in Israel know a little bit about walls, and I've had the privilege of speaking on the Tucker Carlson show and on Fox and Friends and on many radio shows recently about the wall. Okay, now in Israel we have a wall, it's called the Western Wall, you may have heard of, okay, which is the retaining wall of the Temple Mount, a central place of Jewish worship. And then we also have the walls around the old city of Jerusalem, the ancient walls that were built for defensive reasons. But we also have some walls that have been built in the past couple of decades. There's the wall that was built around Judea and Samaria, which is the proper geographic historical term for the West Bank. And it was built, well, the leftists thought that it was being built to denote the borders of the future Palestinian state. Palestinian state, which now means an Arab Muslim, hence terrorist state. But the reality is that those walls that separate the Palestinian Authority areas from the major cities in Israel have been very effective. It cut down on terrorism by 95%. Those walls are built of concrete and also very strong steel with barbed wire, high-tech sensors, and all kinds of things. So then there's the southern border between Israel and Egypt, where there is a very, very strong steel fence. It runs the entire border in the south between Israel and Egypt. It has barbed wire above it. It has high-tech sensors, and there are patrols. And that was built because there were 55,000 Eritreans and Sudanese illegal immigrants that came into the country within 2 years, from 2010 to 2012. And 55,000 in a tiny country like Israel, which is about the size of New Jersey, is a lot. And so the wall was built. And the following year, after its completion, 11 illegal immigrants got in. But that wasn't good enough. So the Israeli government raised the height by a few feet. And the year after that, in 2017, 0 immigrants got in. So walls work. Walls work. And, you know, when I hear Nancy and Chuck, can I say those names here? With all due respect to any Nancys or Chucks that might be here today. So it's important to understand that either they don't know what they're talking about, either they're ignorant because walls do work, or there's something much more sinister at work here. Okay, so having given that very topical introduction, I'm going to give you a little. I should introduce myself. I'll give a very brief introduction about myself. I was born in a place called Brooklyn that you may have heard of. Right, I believe that's where Hillary's campaign headquarters were. Right? Remember her, Bill's wife? Yeah, Hillary. Right, the one with the cell phones and the emails. So I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up as a sometimes atheist, and at a certain point in my young adulthood, the Almighty started sending some messengers into my life, and it eventually led me back to my Jewish roots, and I ended up moving to the land of Israel. I settled in a place called Shiloh. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I see some of you processing it in your heads. Shiloh, that must mean Shiloh, right? So Shiloh, yes, I know there's 65 cities or towns in the United States called Shiloh. There was a Civil War battle called Shiloh. There was a Neil Diamond song called Shiloh. There's even a child, a couple of misguided movie stars called Shiloh. But so I realize the name resonates. So but we call it Shiloh. That's the proper Hebrew pronunciation. Anyhow, Shiloh was the first capital of ancient Israel. For 369 years, Shiloh was the center. Before there was Jerusalem, there was Shiloh. And so that's where I settled. Within about 8 months in Shiloh, I met my lovely wife. And I don't know if you know the story of the judges from the book of Judges, where the young maidens go out dancing in the vineyards in their white dresses. So she was dancing in the vineyards with a white dress. And, okay, I'm exaggerating, but it's a good story. So we got married. We got married within less than a year of my arrival in Israel, and we've been there ever since, raising our family and so on and so forth. Within a few years, I became politically active, and I was elected the mayor of Shiloh. About 2 years after that, I was coming home from Jerusalem in my car, driving home. Halfway home, suddenly there was a massive hail of bullets on the car. The car went completely dead when the bullets hit. I turned the ignition, shifting gears. I could not start the car. I couldn't get it to start. The terrorists were on the side of the road with AK-47 assault rifles shooting at the car. Terrorists from the Fatah organization, by the way, which is Mahmoud Abbas. He's the head of Fatah. The head of the Palestinian Authority, those respectable people who are always welcomed in Washington, or at least they were during the Obama administration. So the car went completely dead. I felt a bullet crash into my left leg. Blood started pouring out all over the place. I couldn't get it to stop. The blood was flowing. The car wasn't starting. The terrorist was shooting. And my 3-year-old son was sitting behind me in the baby seat. I turned around to him and I asked him if he was okay. My son's name is Rubin, or Ruby, we call him. I said, "Ruby, are you okay?" His eyes were wide open. His mouth was wide open. He looked like he was trying to scream or to cry, but no sounds were coming out. But no sounds. But there was no blood that I could see on him. And admittedly, it was a very dark night, but I quickly tried to start the car, thinking I have to get up to Ofra. Ofra is the next community up the road where I hoped I could get an ambulance. So I tried to get away. Car would not start. Terrorists are still shooting. Then suddenly the car started. Almost as if on its own, I slammed on the gas. I drove 170 kilometers an hour, that's 110 miles an hour, to get up the road to the ambulance, which I hope would be in that community up the road. The whole time the car is shaking, and I'm banging on the CB radio that I had at that time. We had a radio in the car that would connect us to the security services, to the Army. And they didn't seem to hear it. But meanwhile, the car's shaking from the speed I was going, and my whole body was shaking, probably from loss of blood. And within a few minutes, I got up to the entrance to that community. So I pull up to the front gate. And you have to understand, every community in Samaria has a big metal gate in the front to keep out the car bombers. And I shout to the guard, "Ambulance, please, get an ambulance." He didn't seem to hear me. But there was a young woman on the side of the road. She started jumping up and down, screaming, "Ambulance, ambulance, don't you hear?" At that point, everyone who was within sound's reach came up to the car. A gas station attendant from the gas station across the street ran up to the car. He ripped off my shirt. He wrapped up my leg to stop the blood flow. He said, "Don't worry, I'm also a paramedic. I know what I'm doing." And he handed me his cell phone. And he said, "Here, call your wife." So I dialed, or I tried to dial. My hand was shaking too much. I handed it back to him. He dialed it for me somehow. I don't know. He's holding my leg tight, and with the other hand, he's dialing the phone. And I told my wife I'd been shot in the leg, and hopefully soon an ambulance will be coming to take me to the hospital, and Ruby is okay. So she said, okay, I'll do my best to get to the hospital, and so I hung up, and then about 30 seconds later, an ambulance zooms up. 2 paramedics leap out of the ambulance. They run to the car. One of them opens the back door and starts unbuckling my son from the baby seat, cradles him in his arms, starts running to the ambulance, shouting, he's also been shot. He's been shot in the head. A bullet had gone into his head, we later found out, causing a skull fracture in the cerebellum and internal bleeding. A skull fracture and internal bleeding in the cerebellum. Well, they quickly wrapped up his head with bandages, put an oxygen mask on his face, connected him to the oxygen tank in the ambulance. And with both of us on stretchers in the ambulance, they took us to the hospital on the other side of Jerusalem. And the whole time we're driving, the sirens are going, and what was I thinking? 2 thoughts. Number one, that I was helpless and I couldn't do anything or say anything, any words of comfort to my son. The second thing I was thinking is, what if they shoot at the ambulance? Because you have to understand, there had been terrorist attacks every day, and we, there was there had been ambulances that had been shot at. So we got to the hospital in Jerusalem. They get to work on both of us. We're in 2 separate emergency rooms. He's in the intensive care wing on the other side of the hospital. I'm in my emergency room. 20 minutes later, the head surgeon comes over to me and he says, David, which is David in Hebrew, of course. David, I just want you to know we're going to have to operate on both of you within the half an hour. It's going to be the first of probably several operations, but I just wanted you to be aware, wanted to give you a heads up on that, and I hope that your son will be okay. Well, about 10 seconds later, someone else walks up to me, and he says, I'm the public relations director for this hospital. I just want you to know that you are the 1,000th victim of terrorism to be hospitalized just in this hospital and just in the past year and a half. And I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to do with that dubious honor that he was giving me. But then he went on to explain. He said, look, my job as public relations director is to protect your privacy. The media is massed outside this emergency room because they want to come in and photograph you and your son and interview the 1,000th victim of terrorism. But I'll keep them away. So I thought for like a minute, images were flying through my head. I was thinking about the terror victims who we already knew. I thought about a friend of mine who had been murdered about a year prior by terrorists, and his body was found next to an Arab village in the cave, mutilated. I thought of all the other terror victims who we already knew, people from our community who'd been killed or wounded in terrorist attacks. And I had this image in my head of my neighbors who used to go to work wearing bulletproof vests and army helmets on their heads. They even had bulletproof vests for little children. So I thought of all of this, and I said to the guy, you know what? You bring them in here. I have what to say to them. And I've been telling the story ever since, and I'd never spoken to anybody from the media before, and I just felt all the frustration of the years of terrorism had built up, and I just had to speak. And I've been telling the story ever since, and I tell the story not because of our personal trauma, because yes, our family has suffered, but many families have suffered far worse. And I tell the story because it's a story of miracles. It was actually on the last night of Hanukkah, which is Hanukkah, for those of you who don't know, it's not just the holiday that falls at the time of Christmas. It also is it's a holiday of miracles. And so it was fascinating that it happened on the last night of Hanukkah. And I started to think about the miracles. I was shot in my left leg, even though the terrorist was shooting from the right side. The bullet missed my right leg. It hit me in my left leg. It went into my left leg and came out the other side. And I have to tell you, that enabled me to drive my automatic car to get to that ambulance. Secondly, the bullet that went into my son's head and through his neck missed his brain stem by 1 millimeter. That's about that much. But on my 5th day in the hospital, I'm laying in my hospital bed, and I get a call from the car mechanic, a nice fella named Erez from Jerusalem. And he says, David, I'm glad that you're on the road to recovery. I just want you to know that we have the car. We've started ordering parts. There are 49 bullet holes in the car. It's going to be very difficult to fix. We're going to do our best. So don't worry. I said, don't worry. Are you serious? My son was laying in the intensive care unit where he spent a good 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks. He was sleeping most of the day because of the bleeding in his brain. When he was awake, he could hardly lift himself up in his bed. He had almost total memory loss. He didn't remember his sisters who came to the hospital to visit him. And I get a call from the car mechanic, and he's telling me, don't worry, we have the car. And he said, David, I'm just calling you because I have to ask you a question. And there was silence on the other end for about 10 seconds. And then I heard a faint voice that almost didn't sound like him asking, why can't we start that car? And a chill went down my back. I have goosebumps all over my body to this day, because I know that the car went dead when the bullets hit, and I know that I tried turning the ignition, shifting gears, doing whatever I could to get the car to start, and I also know I took that one last deep breath before trying to figure out some alternative way to get away from the terrorists, and then the car started, as if it had never had a problem starting before. Now, I have a personal confession to make to you, and I'm not even a Catholic. I've been a believer in the God of Israel for over 30 years. But up until that very day, I still had some of that old New York City skepticism in me when it came to personal miracle stories. But I'm not a skeptic or a cynic any longer, because we were just lifted up on God's wings to get us to that ambulance. And I knew, I understood at that moment that God had planted a mission in me, and I didn't know what it was. I just knew that everything had changed. Everything had changed in my life. And we have an expression in Hebrew, hakol l'tovah, which means everything is for good. Now, it doesn't mean everything that happens is good, but it means that everything happens for a good reason, that something good is supposed to come out of every bad experience. And I started to look for that. And it took a while till I figured it out. 3 weeks later, my son came home from the hospital. And that first week home, well, he was walking again because the bleeding in the brain was drying up. And the first week home, he would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. And frankly, I don't remember if he was awake or not awake, but he was walking, screaming in the middle of the night. This happened a couple of times that first week. And I remember hobbling over to him with my walker. And when he saw me with the walker, he would scream even louder. And I realized that there was deep emotional trauma that he was suffering from. You know, when there are terrorist attacks, people, you know, we have so many in Israel. There were just more terrorist attacks just about a month and a half ago. And when we have them, everyone looks at the physical wounds. And all our focus is on the physical wounds. But it's the emotional wounds, the psychological wounds, that are the ones that are more lasting and that are sometimes ignored. 2.5 weeks later, I'm sitting in my living room. I'm in the corner of the living room reading a book, and my son is on the other side of the living room playing in this big toy car that we had. And I hear him talking to himself. And then I noticed that he's picking up a doll. And then he looks over in my direction and he says, "This is the Abba." Abba means father in Hebrew. He said, "This is the Abba. He has a hole in his leg." Which indeed I did, even after plastic surgery. And then he picked up another doll and he said, "This little baby, he's shot in the head." And when I heard that, I burst into tears. Because I realized three things. The first is that this was the first time that he had verbally expressed anything about the terrorist attack that had happened. This was 6 weeks after the attack. The second thing was that I realized that this is how we can heal his trauma. Some form of role play therapy. Children aren't like adults. Adults can sit down with a therapist and talk it out. Children aren't like that. Children need art and music and animals and all kinds of play therapies to heal their trauma. And that's when I decided to start what would eventually become the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund for the purpose of healing the trauma of the terror victim children and children who suffer from other traumas as well, and to restore some of the lost innocence of childhood for these children. So 14 years later, and we've completed our bar mitzvah year, 14 years later, we have a magnificent therapeutic educational campus that is overflowing. We've actually started building a new campus, and there are over 2,000 children there. It's a therapeutic educational integrated campus where there are two schools, a boys' school, a girls' school. There's a formal therapy center, a petting zoo, a music playground, a music studio. And in addition to that, we have a lot of other programs in neighboring communities, playgrounds and programs for youth, workshops for parents to help them to deal with a lot of the issues that come up. So that's the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund. And what the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund essentially does is takes the darkness and turns it into light, and takes the bitterness and turns it into sweetness. And that's our challenge. That's our challenge in this world. Which brings us to the President and the Presidents of the United States that I want to talk about for a few minutes. Yeah, I know you probably don't understand how it brings us to them, but you'll see in a second. Presidents of the United States have always had a special bond with Israel, which goes all the way back to the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and Abraham Lincoln all spoke about a dream that they had. Okay, we just had Martin Luther King's birthday. I have a dream, right? They had a dream. Their dream was to see Israel returned as a sovereign nation to its land. They spoke about this, they wrote about it, all of them. Harry Truman was another president that was very connected with Israel. He was the president at the time of the founding, the reestablishment of Israel as a sovereign nation again, 1948. And shortly after, he was visited by the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Herzog. He came to thank President Truman for his efforts on behalf of Israel. And he started reading, the rabbi started reading from the book of Ezra in the Bible. And he was comparing King Cyrus, the Persian king that had almost single-handedly financed the rebuilding of the Holy Temple, he was comparing him to President Truman. President Truman said to the rabbi, "Tell me, Rabbi, is it true that the hand of God is in this?" Imagine a president saying, asking if the hand of God is in things happening. And the rabbi said, "President Truman, the Almighty God put you in your mother's womb so that you would have a hand in rebuilding Israel in these times." President Truman burst into tears when he heard this. Now remember, this is Harry Truman we're talking about. Harry Truman was a pretty tough guy. His campaign slogan was, "Give him hell, Harry." Okay, but he became very emotional anytime he had a connection with Israel, because he was biblically connected. And he understood the importance of Israel to the United States, not just on the level of intelligence sharing and having a democratic bastion in the Middle East. He understood it on a spiritual level, that standing with Israel was good for the United States, would bring blessings to the United States. And there have been other presidents since then. Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama. Now, you have to remember, Harry Truman was a Democrat. And you see how far the Democratic Party has come from Harry Truman all the way to Ilhan Omar, if you know who she is, the new Muslim congresswoman, who was already expressing anti-Semitism in public. And there's the other one from Minnesota who's planning a mission to Israel very soon, except she's not planning on going to the parts of Israel that are in Israel's control. She's planning on going to the Palestinian Authority and bringing other congressmen along with her. So there are some challenges today. And that's why President Trump is so important. Now, people have asked me, why did I write the book, Trump and the Jews? And I wrote the book, Trump and the Jews, several years after writing The Islamic Tsunami, Israel and America in the Age of Obama. Because the change was so sharp. And also because many of the Jews in America were in the front lines of the Women's March and were, whose leaders are all anti-Semitic, by the way. And because the American Jewish community was not praising President Trump for all the great things that he's done. And he's only been president for 2 years. He's already taken the United States out of that destructive nuclear deal with Iran. He's already closed down the PLO office, the Palestine Liberation Organization office in Washington, D.C., that was functioning almost as an embassy. And he moved the embassy of the United States to Jerusalem, where it belongs. Now, if there are any never-Trumpers sitting here in this audience, I want you to understand something. I like Vice President Pence very much. But, and there are a lot of conservative Republicans that I like very much. And I've heard some of the criticism from conservative Republicans, and I've heard some of the criticisms from that flake, what's his name? Right. And I've heard the criticism from Mitt Romney, okay, who's upset because he wasn't elected president. Okay, he wasn't elected president because he caved in that last debate with Obama, and didn't say what needed to be said. President Trump is a New Yorker. You have to understand this. I'm also originally a New Yorker. I've been in Israel 27 years, but I'm originally a New Yorker. And it took a crazy New Yorker to do the things that he's done. It took somebody out of the box. Okay, and I know Vice President Pence and, a lot of good people believe in the things that Trump has done, but it took somebody like Trump to do it. And I explained a lot of that in my book, Trump and the Jews. I explained how it happened, why it happened, and where the Jewish community is in all of this. I answered the question, why did the Jews vote for Hillary? Okay, now, right? I bet a lot of you have that question, right? I'll give you the short version. Okay, the longer version, which will really help you to understand, is written in the book Trump and the Jews. But the short version is, most of the American Jews came here in the early part of the 20th century. They came here as legal immigrants, and we have boat records, or at least I have boat records to prove it. But they also came here in poverty. Many of them with barely the shirts on their backs. They worked in the sweatshops on the Lower East Side of New York City and similar places. They suffered from a lot of discrimination. Yes, there was a lot of discrimination against Jews back in the 1920s, 1930s. But what do you think they did because of that discrimination? No, they did not have days of rage, as Al Sharpton would call for, and people like that, who they call Rev when they talk to him on MSNBC. But they didn't complain. They didn't have days of rage. They taught their children, you're going to work hard in school, and and they worked as hard as they could at their work. And they succeeded. And they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. However, in trying to succeed in America as a small minority, American Jews left their Judaic heritage behind. And they adopted another religion that I call liberal religion. And liberal is too kind a word. And they really abandoned their Jewish roots. Okay, so I'm going to tell you right now, there is nothing in Judaism that supports abortion. There is nothing in Judaism that supports same-sex marriage. And I tell you, it's never going to happen in Israel. I could tell you that. It's never going to be legalized in Israel because in Israel, the traditional family is becoming stronger. But I hope that things like that can be reversed here as well, including Roe v. Wade. So don't believe anyone who tells you that the movement that started in the 60s and that has changed America and that got even worse during the Obama years can't be reversed. It can be reversed. So important to remember that. So I believe that President Trump has been doing a great job in restoring Judeo-Christian civilization. He's doing it step by step, very methodically, and hopefully the work that is needed in the educational system will be done as well. So with the Jewish community, so in shedding their Judaism, they also shedded the values of Judaism. And people like Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein haven't the slightest idea what Judaism is all about. When I have a picture in the book of Chuck Schumer carrying a newspaper under his arm, and the caption is, Representative Charles Schumer in Congress carrying the liberals' Bible, the New York Times. So I'm hopeful that Trump and the Jews, and through Trump and the Jews, and through speaking out, that I will get to reach the Jewish community as well about real Jewish values and help to restore a few of them to their roots. So America standing with Israel is what I come to speak about ultimately. And the bonds between the United States and Israel, strengthening those bonds. And one way of strengthening those bonds is through prayer. Okay, and I know it's not politically correct to say that, but prayer is important. Okay, and I pray not to some amorphic God. I pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yes, you can clap for that. Okay, it's not enough to just say that every religion is equal. Okay, because they're not. America was built on Judeo-Christian foundations, and needs to be said. And I don't pray to an Allah. I don't pray to an Allah that, as it says in the Quran, says, let's hunt down the Jew behind the tree and kill him. Or that says, that calls for the death of the Jews and the infidels, which means Christians in their lingo, and in their mosques, and in their American mosques. So let's be aware of that, okay? It needs to be understood. So another way to stand with Israel is to become politically involved. And, I usually emphasize that, but here I'm at the Silicon Valley Association of Republican Women, okay, with a lot of men in the audience too. So I don't think I need to talk about being politically involved and voting and being active. Last but not least, partner directly with those who are active in Israel. And so when I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking about the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, because really, what better way is there to stand with Israel than to stand with the children of Israel? And we have a lot of children in Israel, and especially in the biblical heartland of Israel, where people have 6, 8, 10, 12 children per family. And believe it or not, they come out okay. It's amazing. It's amazing. All it takes is a couple of dedicated parents, and right, a man and a woman, and it works. It works. So I have a couple of videos I'd like to show you. They're 2 short videos. They're about 9 minutes long, each of them, and I'm hopeful that technically you're going to be able to hear it okay, because I understand that there isn't a cable here to connect the sound, but she's going to hold the microphone, and we're going to get that up. So there are two short videos. The first video is you'll see my daughter speaking. That's my oldest daughter, who was 7 years old at the time of the attack, and she's now 24. And the second video is more of a general video of the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, which will give you an idea of what it is that we're actually doing with the children. You'll see the children, and you'll really get a feel for it. So I encourage all of you, before she gets it up and running, tell me when you're ready back there. Before she gets it up and running, I just want to encourage you to come to the back table afterwards and check out my books, which I'll be happy to sign. Now, if we happen to sell out, then you should just go to Amazon.com, type in Trump and the Jews, David Rubin, and you'll be on the page. And please, whether you buy it on Amazon or buy it here, go into Amazon and put in a 2-sentence book review. If you know how to do that, it's very, very simple, because book reviews help to sell books. So I'll just encourage you to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Is your son shot when he's 3? Is he on that video?
You will see him like after the attack. Since I don't know if we're going to have time for questions and answers, it looks like we're pretty tight. If anyone is thinking that question, I will just tell you, my son is alive and well today, and he's doing fine. Okay, so here is my daughter Avital.
As a child, you really don't understand what's going on. You just know that something bad is happening. People were coming in the house, walking out. My brothers were watching TV. I peeked and I saw an ambulance and blood on the television, and I just walked out. I knew that my father and brother were coming back from Jerusalem and they didn't get home, so it had to be connected to them. I went to school the next day. Everyone was looking at me weirdly, and the social worker informed me that my father and brother were in a terrorist attack and that they were hurt. We went to the hospital. I came in and I saw my father lying on a bed, and he looked so hurt and in pain. It's not normal for a child to see her father in such situations. It's the opposite of what normality is. Usually the father is the strong one, the kid is the one that needs help, needs love, needs care. And here it was just turned over the whole aspect of a family, of a parents and a child. So it like shook the ground, and I just felt there was no stability. I don't have a father that is there to support me. He's just lying on a bed with tubes, can't even walk, which is something so basic. They came home, my father and my brother, and everything just went back to normal. Yes, my brother would wake up at night screaming, and my father would walk over to him with crutches and to try to calm him down, but it just made it worse. Everything was normal in terms of them being home, but there was a lot of operations and recovery going on. But to me, it just felt like I'm accepting reality the way it is, and that's it. I was happy, I was good. I thought it was all behind me, and now we're continuing life the way it is, and it's all gonna be okay. For 4 years, actually, all was good, but I wasn't aware that I had a lot of trauma. I wasn't reacting in a normal way to things that were okay. For example, my father and mother went out one night, so I was waiting and they didn't come back, and I tried calling their phones. There was no answer. I woke up my sister and we both started crying. My reaction was very exaggerated to the fact that they didn't answer their phones, which could make sense, but for me it was like, no, that can't happen. It's too much. It means they're dead. It means they're hurt. It means that the terrorists attacked them. And I would cry myself to sleep every night, thinking of what's death, what's behind the idea of death. During the day, I would be with friends. Everything's okay. I wouldn't even tell them what's going on. But then at night, when it was dark out, it would all come to me. I would go outside. I would be scared to go to my friend because I would think the terrorists are going to jump out of the trees and catch me, or or crazy thoughts, like not go upstairs because it's dark. So first my brother would turn on the light and then I would walk upstairs. So I started therapy, and it's musical therapy because I sing and I'm very connected to music. I couldn't express myself, so what she did is we would write songs together, and the ending of the song I would make very positive. And I would sing it and record it and then take it home and listen and write. That was very, very helpful for me. All I can say is that I'm very happy that I had that therapy, and I feel very sorry and I feel pain for the children that don't have the opportunity to deal with their emotions and to have someone supporting them.
I'm David Rubin, Avital's father. Since the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund was established 14 years ago, we've created a therapeutic educational campus with over 2,000 children served every year. We have a total of over 3,000 children who receive our services every year. We provide therapy with horses, with animals. We use music therapy, art therapy, bibliotherapy, sports therapy. All of these therapies are healing the trauma of children. We have individual therapies and we have group therapy. We are literally saving the lives of children and restoring lost innocence of childhood for these children. What we are lacking is the ability to serve the needs of certain children who need group therapies. We try to take everyone in. When family can't afford it, we try to help them, but we need the support of people like you. The families that we serve are in a socioeconomic range that is below the national level. They really do need the subsidies to make it happen. You can make this vision a reality for all of the children who we're trying to serve. About a year after my term as mayor, I was coming home from Jerusalem with my 3-year-old son sitting behind me in the baby seat. Halfway home, the car was hit by a massive hail of bullets from Islamic terrorists on the side of the road. When the bullets hit, I was shot in the leg. Blood started coming out all over the place. My son looked like he was trying to scream or to cry, but no sounds were coming out. The car wasn't starting, it was completely dead, and the terrorists were still shooting. Finally, the car started. I zoomed ahead as fast as I could to get to the next community up the road where I hoped I could get an ambulance. I had been shot in the leg. My son had been shot in the head. The bullet had gone into his head where the skull meets with the neck, causing a skull fracture. The bullet had missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. We had weeks of treatment in the hospital, 2 operations, and what we discovered afterwards was that my son was badly in need of psychological post-trauma therapy. And that's when I decided to start the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, because I understood the mission that God had intended for me was to heal the trauma of the terror victim children and to rebuild the biblical heartland of Israel through those children.
Shiloh, the capital and spiritual center of ancient Israel. It was in Shiloh where the Ark of the Covenant resided almost 400 years.
It's an enormous, awesome privilege that I can be here and be involved and have a part in rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel through children. I thank God every day for that privilege.
Through David Rubin's Shiloh's Fund, the quality of life for children has really grown over the years.
It's really very good for all the children here, for all the people of Shiloh, not only Shiloh but also the other places, other localities near Shiloh.
For Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, for all the fun things they do.
The area of Samaria and Shiloh in particular has suffered from a disproportionate amount of terrorist attacks. There is hardly a child in Shiloh who has not had a parent or a sibling or a family member neighbor or a friend or a teacher who's been killed or wounded in a terrorist attack. Everyone has been traumatized to varying degrees. And for that reason, I understood that there was a need to establish a therapeutic educational complex that would heal the trauma of children. And it would be the best place to serve the needs of the children for the entire Shiloh Township and all of Samaria.
למפגש מגיעים ילדים מכל הסביבה, מאזור שילו, אלי והיישובים בסביבה, ומגיעים גם מאזור השומרון ואזור בקעת הירדן. המטרה שלנו במפגש לתת טיפול שהוא קודם כל מאוד מקצועי, ודבר שני שהוא נגיש. הוא גם קרוב פיזית וגם נגיש מבחינה כלכלית לאנשים שמגיעים לפה.
The kids who come to us for therapy, they talk so much about really like how much they're scared of the Arabs. What if an Arab comes through my window? What if I get a rock thrown at me? A lot of times they have a need to discuss it over and over again, sort of to get it out of their system and maybe feel safe in a crazy situation.
יש פה מטפלים שהם מכירים את האוכלוסייה, הם מגיעים מתוך האוכלוסייה, חלקם חוו בעצמם מקרים של טרור או של טראומות שונות, ומתוך הידע המקצועי שלהם ומתוך הניסיון האישי שלהם הם יכולים לבוא ולתת את הטיפול הכי מותאם למי שמגיע לפה.
Therapeutic horseback riding has been recognized around the world as being a very effective form of treatment for children, and therefore we've incorporated that into our program.
When a child learns to ride on the horse and he does such things that he never did, his self-confidence grows. You can see children that comes here with a body like this, they come back with their back very straight. You can see through the body how they feel inside. The confidence grew.
Ever since Shiloh was reestablished 40 years ago, there has not been a high school here. A 14-year-old boy has to go away to a full-time dormitory school. He doesn't get to see his family for sometimes weeks at a time.
Many people recognize the need and the importance of this project, but government isn't supporting us yet. In order to get the project off the ground, we got the support of the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, and that's what really helped us get started, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do anything.
This project is very important for me because I lost my son, and now I have the opportunity to build a high school for children here in Shiloh. And this gives us a lot of comfort for me and my family.
אנחנו פה צוות שבונים פה את הישיבה התיכונית בגוש שילה. אני נפצעתי בפיגוע לפני 7 שנים. ניסו להוציא אותנו מכאן על ידי פיגועים וטרור, אז מאוד מאוד חשוב לנו להישאר כאן, ושדור ההמשך של הילדים ושיתחנכו פה ושיהיה פה היאחזות חזקה באזור שילה.
I think it's very important that there's finally a yeshiva that's close to home and we don't have to go somewhere far. I want to say thank you for all the people who donated money to the yeshiva that don't live in the country, helping us a lot here. Thank you very much.
בזכות קרן שילה לילדי ישראל, אנחנו יכולים להגשים את החלומות של בית הספר ולהצעיד את הילדים שלומדים כאן מעלה.
יש לנו חלומות של דברים שאנחנו רוצים לעשות, וקרן שילה לילדי ישראל מאפשרת לנו, אם זה בהקמת חדר אומנות שמאפשר לבנות לבטא את היצירתיות שלהם, את הכישרונות שלהם. אם זה בהקמה של מרחבי למידה, ללמידה אישית ופרטנית של הבנות. ובכל בקשה ובכל עזרה, אנחנו יודעים שאפשר לפנות לקרן שילה לילדי ישראל ולקבל שם את העזרה.
I welcome the support of everyone who's willing to stand with us in this struggle as we rebuild the land of Israel, we rebuild the biblical heartland of Israel, and we do it through the children, through the next generation of Israel.